Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Ayin Amud Beis, starting with Ayin Amud Aleph, the very last line on the Amud. The Gemara asks over here if a person neglected to make Erev Chatzeros and he died on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, what's the din? Boy minei Rava min Rav Nachman. Rava asks Rav Nachman the following question: Yoresh Bahu Shivatel Rishus. A person who was Yoresh from his father who died on Shabbos. Again, he did not make Erev Chatzeros before Shabbos. And now, when he dies on Shabbos, can the Yoresh Mevatel Rishus, permitting the Bnei Chotzer to use that Rishus or not? Says the Gemara on Daf Ayin Amud Beis on the top, Heicha di'i boy le'eruvin me'esmo matzim ma'arev bitulinami matzim vatel. The Gemara says, when somebody has the ability to make Erev Chatzeros before Shabbos, he's also able to mevatel his reshus on Shabbos. Aval hai kiven di'i boy le'eruvin me'esmo loy matzim ma'arev loy matzim mevatel. But this Yoresh, who was not able to make an Erev Chatzeros before Shabbos because it was not in his reshus, so he will not be able to also then mevatel the reshus on Shabbos. That's the first side of the question. Oy dilma Yoresh kare de'avuahu, or perhaps we say that since the Yoresh is an extension of his father, and since his father could, yes, go ahead and mevatel reshus had he been alive, since he was able to then make the Erev Chatzeros before Shabbos, he can also then go ahead and mevatel reshus on Shabbos. So we have two different stadim. Do we say that the Yoresh can yes mevatel reshus or not? He cannot because he didn't have the ability to make Erev Chatzeros before Shabbos. Or yes, he can because he's a kare de'avu, he's an extension of his father. Omar le Rav Nachman responds to Rava, Ani oimer mevatel. I hold that yes, the Yoresh can mevatel his reshus on Shabbos. V'hani de Beis Shmuel tanu ein mevatel. However, the Beis Medrash of Shmuel, they say that he cannot mevatel on Shabbos. Esvei, the Gemara challenges Rav Nachman's psak that the Yoresh can mevatel reshus on Shabbos with the following brisa. Zeh klal. The brisa is in truth with the following klal, and it says, Kol shemutar lemiktzas Shabbos hutar lekol Shabbos. Tells us all that is mutar from the onset of Shabbos, even if the status might change, still it remains mutar on Shabbos. V'kol shenesa lemiktzas Shabbos nesa lekol Shabbos. And all that is prohibited from the beginning of Shabbos, even if the status has changed, it remains aser throughout Shabbos. Chutz mimevatel reshus, with the exception of somebody who did not make an eruv before Shabbos, which makes it aser on the onset of Shabbos, still he is able to mevatel reshus on Shabbos. Now the Gemara builds up its question on Rav Nachman. It first explains the brisa, first the ratio. Kol shehutar lemiktzah Shabbos mutar lekol Shabbos. All that is mutar from the onset of Shabbos is mutar for the rest of Shabbos. Going, for example, Eruv derech haPesach v'nistam haPesach. If you have two Chatzeros that want to enjoin and make an Erev Chatzeros with each other, they're required to have an entranceway between the two of them. So on the onset of Shabbos, there was an entranceway, and therefore they made an Erev Chatzeros, permitting them to then transfer an object from one Chatzer to the other Chatzer. Or Erev derech chaloin v'nistam chaloin. Or on the entrance to Shabbos, on the onset of Shabbos, there was a chaloin between the two Chatzeros, again allowing them to make Erev Chatzeros between them. But then in the middle of Shabbos, in the interim, either the Pesach, the entranceway between the Chatzeros, or the chaloin that they had before the entrance of Shabbos became then closed on Shabbos. So still we say, since on the entrance to Shabbos and the entrance to Shabbos it was hutar, it remains hutar even the remaining of Shabbos, even though the entrance between the two Chatzeros or the chalon was nistam. Zeh haklal. Why does the brisa introduce with the word zeh haklal? La'asuye mavui shenitla karoisov ulechayov. When it talks about a mavui that was adjusted on the entrance to Shabbos with either a crossbeam or a side post, allowing the Bnei Chotzer to then use the mavui. and then in the middle of Shabbos, the kare or the lechi falls off. So the klal is teaching us that indeed it remains mutter, even though presently it doesn't have an adjustment. Now the Gemara turns to the seif of the brisa. Kosher nesa lemiktzah Shabbos nesa lekol Shabbos kulo. Whatever was osir from the entrance to Shabbos will then remain osir during the rest of Shabbos, even if the status has changed. Kagon shnei batim b'shnei tzidei reshus harabim. If you have two houses that are opposite of each other with a street, a public reshus harabim going through them, so you only have two walls of these two houses that are facing each other on opposite sides of the derech of the road. V'hikifum nochri mechutza b'Shabbos, and a nochri then added the additional two walls, enclosing the entire area as a chotzer. So there's no problem with making a mechitza on Shabbos, bein b'shoigeng, bein b'mezid. It's a valid mechitza, and certainly over here, if a nachri makes the mechitza, so there's no issue over here of whether the mechitza was a valid mechitza. Only we're saying over here that since the onset of Shabbos, it was osir to use this area because it was only two walls, and therefore midi araisa, it was not a reshus hayachid, and only subsequently during the interim of Shabbos was it closed to be a chotzer. So we say it remains osir. Viktani, o lasuye ze'akla lasuye mai. What is the introduction of the brisa saying ze'aklal? What's it coming to include in the seifa? Lasuye nochri b'Shabbos. If a nochri dies on Shabbos, since one did not, if he had two different Yisraelim that shared the chassid with him, and they were not zoichet to then soicher the chelik of the nachri before Shabbos, and mevatel reshus. So now when the nachri dies on Shabbos, it remains also to them the entire Shabbos. The brisa concluded, Viktani chut mevatel reshus. Even though we stated that which is also from the onset of Shabbos remains also throughout Shabbos, we have an exception that when it comes to an Eruv, Chatzeros that was not made to permit the Bnei Chotzer to use the Chotzer, if on Shabbos one is Mevatel his Reshus, even though he neglected to make the Eruv Chatzeros, he can do so on Shabbos. So the Gemara now asks its question on Rav Nachman. It stated, Chutz mi Mevatel Reshus. It doesn't state somebody who's Mevatel Reshus and a Yaresh. Ihu in Yaresh Loi. The Gemara asks on Rav Nachman, we see from here this brisa that a Yaresh cannot Mevatel Reshus on Shabbos. Answers the Gemara, Ema Chutz mitoraz Bitel Reshus. That the brisa means to say that the exception of the concept of the institution of being Mevatel Reshus on Shabbos, that is going to be then an exception. That which is osir, says the brisa, on the onset of Shabbos remains osir throughout Shabbos, with the exception of a person who did not make an Erev Chatzeros before Shabbos. The Torah's Eruv will permit him to then go ahead and Mevatel Reshus on Shabbos. One can yes Mevatel Reshus on Shabbos, including a Yaresh. Eisvei, the Gemara now challenges Rav Nachman from a different brisa. It states, Echa b'bnei chotzer shemeis ve'niach reshusu le'echa min hashuk. One of the bnei chotzer, he died, and although he made an Erev Chatzeros with the bnei chotzer, he died, and he left his Yerusha to somebody from the shuk. If it's mi boid yoim that he died, oiser. Since mi boid yoim he died, so therefore we say that the one who was Yaresh, since he didn't yet make an Eruv together with the Bnei Chotzer, so then he's Oyser, the Bnei Chotzer, from using that Chotzer. Mishecha Shecha ain't Oyser. However, if the one who was in the Chotzer died on Shabbos after nightfall, so then the Eruv that he had then made with the Bnei Chotzer is valid, and we say, since it was Hutar Mikzas b'Shabbos, it remains Mutter throughout the Shabbos, like we learned earlier. The Brisa goes on to say, ve'echad min hashuk shemeis v'iniach v'shusa le'echad mimnei chotzer. If you have somebody from the shuk who had a residency, he also had a bias in the chotzer, and he did not make an eruv with the bnei chotzer, and he left his property, he was marish to somebody from the chotzer. So it depends. Mi ba'od yom, if he died mi ba'od yom, einoi oiser. He's not oiser because we say that the bnei chotzer, he would make an eruv with the bnei chotzer before Shabbos. So therefore, it's not going to be oiser on the bnei chotzer. However, if he died mishechashecha oiser, if he died after nightfall, then it will oiser on the bnei chotzer. Ask the Gemara, granted, so the one who was part of the chotzer, who was yaresh, did not make an eruv with that chelik, but still, amai oiser levatel, let him mevatel his reshus, as Rav Nachman said. Elamai, you see from this brayso, not like Rav Nachman, that a yaresh cannot mevatel reshus on Shabbos. Answers the Gemara, my oiser nami tiktoni. What is meant in the brayso when it says oiser? It means ad sheyevatel, before he is mevatel reshus. But once he's mevatel reshus, he can do so, and therefore a yaresh can mevatel reshus, and it's not a kasha on Rav Nachman.